G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. I think I'm going to do a dual purpose video. On the one hand, for Christmas, I got a copy of Primitive Technology by John Plant because I like his videos. And I was asked, what do you want for Christmas? So we could do a bit of a book review. Survivalist Guide to Building Tools, Shelters and More in the Wild by John Plant. Nice little book. Published out of England. Printed and bound in China. There are lots of stills taken from the YouTube video series. Table of contents, kind of self-explanatory, I'm assuming you can read. Page full of disclaimers. Basic toolkit of a hammerstone, stone blades, hand axe, digging stick, mallet and chisel. And there are very brief, succinct, more or less accurate descriptions and drawings showing what to try to achieve, and my guess is it might take months to actually be able to produce something that looks like that on demand. I feel fairly sure that if you've watched the videos, then the book will be a really good memory jogger. And for some things, yeah, there's quite a lot of detail. I don't know how you'd go starting out from scratch if you haven't seen the videos. A picture's worth 1,000 words, perhaps, and a video is considerably more information dense. But it is what it is. It's a book. It came out in time for Christmas. And it does give you a pretty good view of what to do, how to do it, why it might be useful. In the chapter on clothing and textiles, we have standard weave basket, coil weave basket, twinning weave basket, cordage, drop spindle, loom. And that's kind of where we're going to split into a dual purpose video, because I'm sure you've got the idea of what kind of a book this is. It's a high grade, interesting book that'll be a lot more use to people who've watched the videos than to somebody who hasn't. But yeah, if you had no idea, and if you had a functional rainforest around you, because this fellow lives in far north Queensland, under those circumstances, this might be a vital thing to have in your Apocalypse Now bug out bag. Something to read by candlelight, perhaps. And here we go. Yesterday I put out a couple of videos on a construction project that I was completing maybe 70 years after it got left alone. A small loom taken from the Stonehenge School. It might be an inkle loom, perhaps, I want to say, kind of, but maybe not. I don't own a textbook on spinning or weaving, but I picked up a smattering as a kid. So anyway, let's see what Primitive Technology has to say about looms, and then I'll go and stick 5 strings around the loom and put on a bit of a demonstration, because I actually had a comment from one of my viewers, how you going, Paulo, who says that he's not English and he doesn't understand what a loom means. So I tried to explain it in words, but yeah, we're back to the idea that a picture's worth 1,000 words and a video is much more information dense than a still. A loom is a frame for weaving. I started using looms when I found out how difficult it is to weave cloth by hand. Tools, you need a hammerstone, look to page 14 for that. 4 short sticks, 25 centimetres long for wooden pegs. Thread or pieces of yarn, see page 78. 2 pieces of wood for the stationary and movable crossbars. 2.5 feet or 75 centimetres long for a loom this wide. Okay, so yeah, all right. Figure A, use the hammer stone to hammer 2 pegs into the ground at one end of what will be the loom. Figure A, have a stationary crossbar at one end of the loom tied between 2 stakes. Figure B, at the other end, at a distance that will be the length of the loom, hammer in half the number of pegs as there will be vertical threads. Space the threads according to how fine you want the cloth. For coarse fibre, 1 inch or more apart will do. Any closer might be too tight. Put the movable crossbar behind these pegs. Tie the ends of the vertical threads to the stationary crossbar at one end. Tie the other end of the threads, the other end of every first thread to a peg, and the other end of every second thread to a movable crossbar. Figure C. Okay, so you've got one half of your threads tied to that bar there. You've got half of your threads tied to what he calls his movable crossbar. In weaving talk, that's going to be called a heddle. How to make cloth with a loom. With the movable crossbar down, take a long spool of yarn and thread through the gap between every first and second thread. This threads the yarn over and under the vertical threads. Now lift the crossbar, creating a new gap, and thread the yarn back through the threads in the opposite direction. This threads the yarn under and over the vertical threads, the opposite of when the crossbar was in the down position. This holds the cloth together. When a square or rectangular piece of cloth is the size you want it to be, tie off the ends and take it off the loom. Well, yep, okay. That'll weave you a pretty good mat. And that's all he's going to tell you about it. Bingo, you're onto sandals. So, primitive technology. It's a broad, shallow overview of a lot of stuff. It's a spin-off of a highly successful YouTube channel. Anyway, here we have something a bit more medieval and less Cro-Magnon. 1.4 metres around. So that's 56 inches, which is 4.66 feet. So allowing for the thickness of the warping stick, you can probably get an exact 4.5 feet or 1.5 yards off this loom. This is the warping stick. It has to be able to fit through that gap there. Also that gap there, as well as the ones on the bottom. That warping stick, that's what the threads of the warp will be tied onto. Whereas the weft will go onto the shuttle. And this thing, with holes in the centre, is called the heddle. So it's kind of a bit on the laborious side, but basically you tie each string on separately. There is a way using a thing called a warping board, so you can get all your strings laid out together in one great big endless circle and then cut them at the right time, and then you still have to tie them on one by one. Okay, so purely for the purposes of demonstration, this shows the principle of the operation. With the threads going around the outside, coming up over the variable tension bar, which is the bit that I put on yesterday. I don't pretend to have done an absolutely perfect job of threading this thing up. I've only got about 6 bloody strings on it, which involves 12 knots and 300 inches of kite string. And believe it or not, that actually permits one to weave. So I'll see if I can actually demonstrate some of that. There we go. Undid a bit. And back there. Once you get the thing set up, it's not so difficult. At least it's not so difficult when you don't drop the shuttle and put too much tension on the weft. But yeah, that's more or less how the little loom works. And if you could imagine 44 threads in the warp, then yeah, you could make yourself a little piece of material across here, and it might suffice to be a scarf. Personally, I think the old girl made a bit of a mistake when she got me to trim the heddle as short as it is, because it wobbles from side to side, but that's only because I've only got 6 threads on the warp. If you had the whole thing threaded, wouldn't be a problem. So, cross between medieval technology and primitive technology. But all I can say is that having strung this and woven that tiny weeny little bit, I reckon this is, well, it would have to be a labour of love. You'd really have to want to make a piece of material on this. To make a piece of material on this, it could fairly be called torturous for a bloody primary school age kid. But I suppose if the grown-up strings the loom first, then the kid can have a lot of fun using it. And if this is a pain in the arse to use, and the one in here, it would be an absolute flaming nightmare. But yeah, at the guts of it, that is your basic loom. Whereas this is a highly advanced medieval version. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. How's that for a different style of a book review? Ciao.